You are listening to Earn Your Stripes, presented by Cardinal Spirits. This episode of Earn Your Stripes is presented by Cardinal Spirits, a distillery and bar in Bloomington, Indiana. Thank you to Cardinal Spirits for jumping on as the presenting sponsor of this podcast. We really appreciate it. Look forward to doing business going forward. But if you've not heard of Cardinal Spirits or have not been in there, tried any of their products, you need to do so pretty soon. They hooked us up with a nice box, a starter kit, so to speak. And I got to tell you, their spiced rum, I'm a harsh critic of spiced rum because that's one of my favorite drinks, a nice Captain and Coke or rum and Coke. But the Cardinal Spirits spiced rum rivals any of them. I really enjoyed drinking it with some Coke Zero. Their vodka goes really well with Red Bull. They have gin, coffee liquor, anything you could imagine. And I think you would really enjoy trying it out. We'll be doing some distillery tour giveaways throughout the next couple of months with Cardinal Spirits now as the presenting sponsor. So be looking at our Facebook page, Twitter, or just follow the podcast page and continue to listen to the podcast for updates on those competitions to see if you can win a free distillery tour to Cardinal Spirits. Their tasting room bar is open Monday through Thursday from 4 to 10 p.m., Friday from 12 p.m. to 12 a.m., Saturday from 10 a.m. to 12 a.m., Sunday from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. The kitchen is open for dinner Monday through Sunday from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. and for brunch on Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. They're located at 922 South Morton Street in Bloomington. Check them out online. You can call them at 812-202-6789 or visit them online, cardinalspirits.com. Welcome to the first episode of Earn Your Stripes, a brand new podcast. I'm Justin Albers. I'm joined by my co-host Max Bielfeldt, who played basketball at both Michigan and Indiana to finish his career. We hope to accomplish in this podcast is to give you interview conversations with people you may know, you may not know, but by the end of the conversation, we hope you have a good feel for the type of person that they are, not just in what they do as a profession, but who they are as a person, and really get deeper into the storytelling than you often hear on podcasts.
Yeah, I think you guys will enjoy this. We have a couple interviews we've done that are interesting. I mean, the Ed Schilling interview we just finished up is very enlightening. It dives into a couple concepts of recruiting. It talks about the current state of the Indiana team and the future, and basically how things are run on a day-to-day basis that will be able to kind of understand what this team has in the future. We have a lot of other interviews set up, that couple we've done so far that I think, I think it'll be very interesting. It'll be the whole college basketball landscape. We'll be able to shed a light on that for the most part, and I think it'll be pretty interesting for the most part.
Yeah, and it's an interesting time, I think, too, Max, for us to be starting this podcast just with all the stuff that's gone on in college basketball, both on and off the court over the last couple of months, and just to dive deep into our areas of expertise and interest, both within and without sports. But within college basketball, you have all this stuff going on with the FBI in Louisville, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point over the course of the basketball season. But then you have season is in full swing now. Indiana, as we record this podcast, is 3 games in. By the time you are listening, probably 4 games in, and just a lot of exciting stuff going on. So it's a pleasure to be joined by Max and do this podcast with him. I appreciate you doing it, Max, and I really look forward to how we grow this thing, how we develop, and I hope you guys enjoy listening.
Yeah, definitely.
So as Max mentioned, Ed Schilling, the Indiana assistant men's basketball coach and the former head coach at Park Tudor. He served as an assistant under Steve Alford at UCLA prior to joining Archie Miller's staff at Indiana. He's going to be our featured guest for this first episode, and his interview, like Max said, is really good. I think you guys will enjoy that. We'll get to that here in just a few minutes, but I want to lead off with a couple listener questions that we got sent in via email before the show, and we encourage you as these shows go on, anytime you have a question, whether it's Indiana basketball related, sports related, or not related to sports at all, we encourage you to send us those questions either via direct message, tweet at us, find us on Facebook, or you can email me at jmalbers@indiana.edu or max@maxbielfeldt@gmail.com. and ask your questions there. You can remain anonymous if you want to be, but we encourage you to send those questions because we really enjoy getting them, and I think we'll enjoy answering them as well. For this week, Max, I'll let you go ahead and answer this first one, but read the question first. Steve from New Albany here, a place of interest Indiana fans, given Romeo Langford plays at New Albany. Steve says, as to the slower than we wanted start to the season, there have been those crazies who have already been calling out everyone from the school president to the guy who sweeps up after games. Just curious if coaches, players pay much attention to social media these days. The negativity would most certainly not be a motivator. In my opinion, James Blackman Jr. took so much grief the last couple of years he was here, unwarranted or not. I just think some people just go out of their way to be negative just because they can behind a keyboard at home. I personally like to stay positive and focus on the future, and yes, I'm a big James Blackman fan. Wish he had stayed another year. Thank you, too, for your hard work, and Max, I really enjoy your commentary during the games.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Steve. It's a good question. I mean, honestly, just the age we live in right now is so bizarre. I mean, like, Michael Jordan didn't have to search his name on Twitter after a game and be like, man, he said, what about me? And, start overthinking everything. But I think you kind of answered your own question a little bit, calling them crazies, just because, like, that's kind of how you have to look at it. Because, like, sometimes, like, it was, whether it was me or a teammate or anybody, if you'd get on Twitter after a game and let's say you went, 6 for 9 and you were whatever, you almost had like 8 rebounds and you had a pretty good game. There's always someone that is tuning in that tweets out like, at Max Bielfeldt, like that kid shouldn't even be playing like Big Ten basketball. And I'm like, you know what I mean? Like it's just so avoiding trolls. That's really what they're doing. They're just trolling and trying to like get in your head. I mean, I think there actually needs to be like a formalized strategy that the university like teaches you. Okay, you can deal with this Twitter criticism in 3 ways. You can address it, which is probably never good because you don't really want to respond to these people and let the person that has, they're following 350 people and they have 11 followers because nobody wants to follow their negativity. You can interact with them, which I wouldn't recommend. You can ignore them, or you can do something proactive and grow from that. I mean, I think ignoring and doing something proactive is probably your best bet. It's just because it's just not worth it. I mean, for the most part, a lot of these people that are saying these things have never had a spotlight on them, and it's just tough. It's just because it's so just disgusting for the most part. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, yeah, it's crazies. Just as a player, a lot of these guys, most of them know by now, like, it's not worth the effort. You feel bad because it's almost like advertising. Like why does an ad of a bottle of Corona popping up on your screen make you want to go buy Corona later? Like it's in your environment and it's being put in your zone. It hangs with you a little bit. But you have to be mentally strong just to understand that the magnitude of what's being said literally has no value at all.
Yeah, I agree completely, Max. And I think the mute button on Twitter is a beautiful thing. Just avoid all those kind of people altogether, or the block button, whatever you so choose. But I think even outside of sports, social media is dangerous in that way because often – I mean, that's one of the things that I really struggled with toward the end of my time covering Indiana full time was it's moving more to remote work where you're working independently and you're not getting a ton of feedback either from coworkers or management or anything like that. They tell you you'll only hear from us if there's a problem or if you're doing something wrong. So the only immediate day-to-day feedback you're getting is the stuff that you're seeing on social media. And oftentimes that can be super unhealthy and it's almost always negative. So that was something I really had to learn how to deal with. And a guest that we'll have on this podcast on one of these episodes soon, former Indiana coach Tom Crean is someone who really helped me figure that out and navigate the difference between social media and the real world, because it's so easy to get trapped in there and become the persona that Twitter or Facebook thinks that you are. And when your personality on Twitter or social media doesn't match your personality in real life, I think that divisiveness creates a real problem in your life. So I think it extends beyond sports, but I'd be interested, Max, to
Yeah, I mean,
to hear.
let me add on that. I mean, anytime you try to be somebody you aren't, it's long term. Time is a teller of all truths. It's not going to work out. It's not going to work out. A lot of people, they have this, however many likes you get and how many followers do I have, and it's such a numbers game. Just the way human beings have grown for generations is, the way back to the days of, early like kings and whatnot. It was the biggest, strongest, it was the most power, and who can show that. Now you have a numbers to show, followers, and it's such a competition now, and it can really get in your head for the most part. You just have to. That's just the value of being positive and taking these things with a grain of salt. Just because no matter who you compare yourself to, you probably can find a way to be insecure about something or be annoyed about something. It's about your mental strength and how well you can handle those sort of things.
Well, those people, the trolls you mentioned, Max, are often, they're just trying to elicit a response out of you, is essentially what you were getting at there, and why you shouldn't respond a lot of the times. But when you do, and you don't respond in a way that they expect you to, you don't act in a hostile manner, you don't come back at them with the same hostility that they came at you with, then they often end up apologizing. Or I've had people that I said I have to block you on Twitter. I just can't deal with the negativity. I'm trying to live in the positive. And 2 months later, I'll get an email from that person, a 3-4 paragraph email saying they don't know at what point, how down they were in their life to have said those things to me on Twitter, and they apologize, and they hope that I'll unblock them, but understand if not. And so oftentimes it's they just want to be heard, they want to be seen, and they feel like that's a way to do it. And when you come back at them with a response that they don't expect, it's polite or kind, or just not the response that they wanted to elicit out of you, they oftentimes end up apologizing or end up realizing that you're not just a figure out there. You're actually a human being just like they are. And just because you're behind a keyboard doesn't mean that another human being somewhere else isn't seeing what you're saying.
Yeah, it's interesting because, talking about hiding behind a keyboard. It's so new. Like, people just don't know how to deal with it. And I think it's interesting. Athletes and, celebrities and athletes, for the most part, they're the ones that get the biggest spotlight on them. Every little thing they do. It's funny. I listen to old coaches and old players that, back in the 80s, I was at a frat party when I was in college, and I didn't have to worry about someone taking a picture. I did crazier things than people get in trouble for now. And it's so new, and and being able to handle it it's such a new concept that we haven't had to deal with in our lives. And I think it's tough for athletes and celebrities. And I think it's also, like you were saying, even the average person, like, people just, as soon as you say something, as you give someone content, all of a sudden they feel like they can remark on that. And like you're saying, that was really enlightening to me, the email you got. And that's crazy. Like, I for the most part, just the magnitude of criticism that you get as an athlete, the most important thing you can do is just have a strict rule, like, hey, I'm just not going to respond, or I'm just going to laugh at it. Like, most of the time, I would say I was fairly mentally strong, more than some teammates I've had. And, I would read these things. A lot of people are like, man, just don't look at it. Like, don't look at it. It'll bother you. I'm the kind of guy, like, I would look at it and I'd be like, that's like funny. Like, I would genuinely be curious. All right. I would want to put myself in their shoes and be like, what would ever make me type that? You know what I mean? Like, where do I have to be? Like, it was almost like a case study for me. I was interested.
Right. Because you're living in a virtual world. You kind of have this, I think it's a problem that extends even beyond just the social media aspect. It's the disconnectedness from other humans, and the fact that these people, and I fall into it sometimes myself, is you forget that it's real life. Like you think it's a game, or you think it's not real because you're not seeing the person stand in front of you. You would never say that to the person standing in front of you. So it's like it's a game. And I think that extends into money, how you spend your money, because almost all of our money now is virtual. I hardly ever take cash out of the bank, pay for something, and take cash, take it to the bank to deposit it. It's deposited in there. I use a card to take it out. So you never actually see the money. So it's easy to become to the point where it's almost like fake money. It's not real because you're not holding it. It's a lot more painful to take out $100 from the bank and hand it away than it is to hit $100 on an app or a credit card and do the purchase the same way. You're losing the same amount of money, but it feels different. And I think that's
why do you think casinos use chips?
Exactly. And pump in oxygen and all those other things.
Too. you throw a black chip down, you're like, oh, I'm just gambling, until you realize, wait, that black chip is worth $100. And they're pumping the oxygen and my adrenaline's flowing, and I'm super awake, and it's 5:30 a.m.
Right. And I also think there's a perception that people believe that others don't care what they say on social media, or that they won't see it. It's almost like a lack of awareness. So I'd be interested to hear from your perspective how it was when you got to Michigan. I don't know exactly what point social media was at then, how it evolved during your time at Michigan, and kind of what the program's policy was, or if there was one, or what kind of guidance you guys received. And then in Indiana, the same thing. How different was it? Was there guidelines, and were you able to be advised on things you should do if certain things happen?
So my freshman year at Michigan, we had this group come in that the whole premise of the group was they would add you on social media. Facebook, it was mostly Facebook and Twitter my freshman year. They would add you as like a secret account, and they would basically go through everything, all your pictures and all your content, and find something that you might have tweeted or posted a picture a long time ago, and basically, embarrassed you. And they put it up on a huge screen in front of your coaches, in front of like the women's basketball team, and things like the football team was in there. Like, you know what I mean? So they'd go through and they would pull up this picture. I think one of me was when Photo Booth on Mac started becoming a thing, and you could put in like, whatever background you wanted. I had when I was like a freshman in high school, like we were just joking around, and I had a picture of like a huge like zit or something. And like, we were like just like poking the zit, and it's just like really, like, is this how you want to be? I was like, well, I look pretty dumb now, and that's the only picture you pull up. And there was like other people that, were like flipping the bird to the camera, and it's, like this, it's not something that you want to show in front of your coach. And I think it really just kind of illuminated the entire concept of, you are what you post, and you got to really be careful about that. So that was interesting. Just the power of, how social media grew. Twitter really started to blow up my first couple of years of playing. Like, to put it into perspective, Spike Albrecht, when he had 17 points in the first half of the national championship game in 2012.
I was at KOK.
You were at KOK, yeah. He had that huge half. He finished up the game. He gets on Twitter, and he has an extra 40,000 Twitter followers. Like 3 hours earlier, he was at like 6,000. He gets on Twitter 3 hours later, he has 46,000 Twitter. Like, that's unheard of. You know what I mean? So, and also, like, you look up his name and everyone's saying all sorts. Like, it's absurd. Like, it's just the power of it, the magnitude. It's like having a TV show on your life the whole time.
Yeah. And that's actually a positive example of how it's evolved and how it's grown. But to your initial point about people trying to find the worst side of you or the worst thing of you and expose it, I think that still happens. And the more public you are a figure, the more likely it is to happen. So I think that's when I coached AAU a couple of years ago with Indiana Elite, and a lot of those guys, or all those guys now, the team I coached are freshmen in college now. One of them was Jaren Jackson Jr., who just had a great game at Michigan State, my brother who plays at Marion. What we always talked to those guys about was the fact that it is permanent. Once you post something, even if you delete it at some point, someone somewhere probably has a screenshot of what you posted. So once you put it out there, it's permanent. And I think that's the whole concept behind Mark Cuban's kind of business model with social and cyber dust and the stuff that will just be erased after a certain period of time, because it is so dangerous that it can be out there forever. And one stupid decision or one stupid moment where you decide to post something could alter your entire career, or make a college not want to take you, or make you be perceived as something or somebody that you're not. And as we know, perception becomes reality. So it's dangerous in that way. And I think that's the lesson as social has evolved.
Yeah,
that you need to know that it's permanent. And so whatever you put out there, make sure you're cool with it being out there forever, because somebody will inevitably take a screenshot of it, even if you decide a minute in you need to delete it.
And it's human nature too. You know what I mean? Like, it's human nature to say things that, we don't need to be held accountable for. I mean, look how it's affecting politicians. You know what I mean? So, like when Twitter first started, when books are kept about everyone's mistakes, people were starting to be held accountable. Now there's videos, and you have cops wearing the cameras on their vests, videoing everything they do. Everyone's being held accountable. And, we haven't, as a species, we haven't been conditioned to be able to handle that. Like, we're being held accountable for so many things. Everything we say, we're being held accountable for. You know what I mean? Like, everything you do, if, I'm 22 years old at Indiana, and I go to the bar with some buddies and have a beer, like, someone takes a picture of me and sends it to coach and be like, man, your kid was out last night and he was having a beer. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm literally just with my friends, want to go have a beer. I'm 22 years old, nothing illegal about it. Tomorrow's an off day. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what more do you want me to do? I mean, it's just, people have this myth of what people should be like, whether it's leaders, whether it's athletes, whether it's politicians, and they have this image. And as soon as that image is spoiled, they freak out. I mean, they freak out. Like, I had, for instance, and it's wild. Like, it blew my mind. So last night, I'm friends with a high school basketball coach here in Peoria, Illinois, and he's a coach at a Christian school, and they have these strict rules. Like, I remember one of my buddies growing up, he if he was caught like cussing or something, he would be like suspended for like a week. Like, I'm like, wow, that seems a little extreme. You know what I mean? Like, you go to like a public school and you can cuss at the teacher. Like, it's, you know what I mean? It's a little bit different. But like, this school is like super sheltered, and it's wild. So this guy, we're like, oh, you want to come like hang out? And he's like, no, like, if they catch me out at a bar, like if a mom or something like calls in the administration, like I could get in trouble for that. I'm like, wow, like, I thought it was just for like college athletes and, the people with like a spotlight, but we're talking about, high school, single A high school basketball coaches. Like, this is spreading up. People that have been sheltered for a long time freak out, and people that, haven't been sheltered, they throw this content out, and everyone just thinks everyone else is crazy. And I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, and I think to a certain extent, it's even more dangerous at the high school and lower level than it is what we're talking about as college athletes and people who have a large following on any social platform. Because if one of those things or something that you may be embarrassed of or is taken out of context is exposed when you're in high school, that, I mean, you're not mentally as strong at that point in your life to handle that kind of stuff. And that's what leads to a lot of the cyberbullying stuff that we see nowadays and all of that. When you're
high school's already hard enough. You know what I mean?
Right. When you're
already going through everything.
When you're a college athlete at a Big Ten school with 40,000 kids, like, that's one thing. Like, yeah, you still don't want it to go out there, but you're a grown man. You're mentally strong enough to handle it. When you're in high school and there's 500 kids in your school and something like that happens and everybody's talking about it and it's taken completely out of context, it's dangerous. And so I think your point is well taken there, about how far this reaches, and how, I mean, this question started very generally.
Thanks, Steve. We've got into a 25-minute conversation, but it's important. Like it's wild. You could talk about this all day.
You really could, because it's going to be seemingly part of our lives. I mean, a lot of people thought Twitter wasn't something that was going to survive, and it's still not making a lot of money. They haven't figured out how to monetize it in the way Facebook has, but these platforms aren't going away, and there will only be more to come. So this is going to be part of our lives, less and less face-to-face interaction or even voice-to-voice interaction, and more via social media. So, I mean, you may not, I think, to kind of sum this up, be the person on social media that you want people to think you are in real life, because the fact of the matter is 95% of the people that follow you or see your profile on Twitter will never meet you in real life. So to them, you are who you are on Twitter. That is their perception of who you are. So be as real on social media as you are in real life. Try and present yourself in a manner that is actually how you are, and I think that'll end up being the best solution for you.
And I think we just illuminated, like everyone has these corny quotes that they put out, and it's like, like, stay true to yourself, and it's like, all right, that was like the corniest thing I've ever heard. But that entire rant basically just said, the importance of that quote that's gone down for generations and generations, and how important that is.
Exactly. And one last thing before we get to the other question, I wanted to touch on was just, it's all about the circumstances, right? Like you mentioned, you could get a photo taken at a bar and sent to coach, or even worse, tweet it out and say, look what Indiana basketball is doing after a loss. And it's all circumstances, right? You hit the buzzer beater, you win the game, you beat a number one school, you upset somebody at home. Everybody in Bloomington wants you to drink a beer with them, go take a shot with them. You're on a losing streak. You have a day off the next day. You're seen at the bar. Suddenly you don't care about winning, and you shouldn't be out, and you should be working on your game. It's all about the circumstances. And
yeah, 100%.
I got to see that firsthand, and how it's taken. I mean, I saw Troy Williams out after a game where they lost, and people had a problem with that. And then Troy hits a game-winning shot or scores 23 and pulls down 10 rebounds, and nobody's talking about Troy being out. So it's all about the present circumstances. And so it's super unfair, but I think you kind of you could answer this better than me, but I think you kind of know that going in.
Yeah, I mean, 100%.
All right, the other question we got. And again, encourage you to continue sending these questions in. I thought the ones we got this week were really good, but
every question you send in, I'm sure we'll spend 20 minutes on, so you will be valued.
Steve, you got the first question of the podcast, so you got the longest answer we'll ever do, hopefully.
Yeah, good job, Steve.
So the second question comes from an Indiana student, Jason Morin, a current junior at IU. Jason, thanks for the question. My question for you and Max is, how can IU compete with other big basketball schools around the country without promoting this culture trend of one-and-done players? IU seems to look for players that can build throughout their college career, but these players don't lead to the success that talented freshmen bring right out of the gate. So, Max, you want to start on that one? Basically, how can Indiana compete without promoting the one-and-done culture?
I think that gets a little bit overblown, just because, I mean, Justin, you and I were talking, like, look at North Carolina last year, the team that won it, a lot of seniors, a lot of veterans, and we talk on the interview with Ed Schilling about it a little bit, just of, what it takes to win, and how a lot of these young kids in high school don't understand what it takes to win, because they've been so, whether it's genetically or athletically blessed, they could, in high school, if they're down 5 with 2 minutes left, they can just kind of out-athlete people and do what they want. But once you get into the college level, and there's everyone at the college level is the best player on their team, and you have to be mentally stronger. You have to be more of a tactician. You beat them in different ways. And I think, that just shows how competition expands you. But to play to the question, I think the key is when you're recruiting, and again, we talked to Schilling about this. You recruit the type of play. Obviously, you get. It's like I'll say it's like a girl. You know, like when you see a pretty girl, it's like, oh, like I want to go talk to her. Like it's just natural. It's the same thing with a player. You see a player. It doesn't have to be pretty, but you see a player that has talent, and that first catches your eye. And then you go and meet them, and you vet them out and see what they're like as a person. And then, whether they're a one and done, I think that is secondary to the type of player you want to recruit in your program and the culture you want to build.
Or the type of girl you want to pursue, right, Max?
Exactly. it all plays in. If you go talk to a pretty girl and she's an airhead, it's like, wow, yeah, she's a 5-star talent, but I don't see her working out long term just because
she's a one and done.
She's a one and done.
Yeah, I think just the whole concept here, the way he phrased the question, promote the culture of one and done. I think there's only I don't really think any school maybe promotes the culture of one and done. Kentucky, you can make the argument because they take so many. But for the most part, other than schools like Kentucky and Duke, who routinely now get 2 and 3 5-star potential one and done players every year, every other program, major or not, is going to get a one and done here and there, but not consistently. I mean, you're recruiting a guy that you think will help your program win. You're not recruiting him thinking he's going to be here for 1 year and be gone. So I think it's all in the perspective of how you're recruiting the kid. For example, Indiana got Noah Vonleh, ended up being a one and done. Indiana didn't win anything with that. So why go after that one and done culture when you see how that one worked versus Victor Oladipo and Will Sheehy coming in as the worst ranked class in the Big Ten, and those guys eventually win a Big Ten title at Indiana. So I think the point Jason's question is trying to make is the immediate success that one and dones can provide may not be there. But I think if you look at the teams that win national championships every year, they're rarely the teams that are loaded with one and dones. And if they are loaded with one and dones, they have a lot of veteran leadership around them to help mold those guys. There's always going to be the special teams like Kentucky the year when they had Anthony Davis and Marcus Teague and Marcus Kidd-Gilchrist that are going to be able to get it done from a sheer talent standpoint. And you look at Duke and Jahlil Okafor and Tyus Jones and those guys. There's going to be rare teams like that are young, youth-based, but still those teams have veterans as well and experienced coaches. I don't think you're not going to see Kentucky this year starting 5 freshmen win a national title. You're just not. So the one and dones on their own are not going to probably win you a title. And really, coaching styles are not – you have to alter your coaching style so much if you're used to getting guys that you only expect to be there for a year. John Calipari has been able to do that, but it's a different coaching style than a guy like Archie Miller who's expecting you to grow each year that you're in the program and not just come in for kind of an accelerated course and then be gone. Yeah,
and I think – one thing to keep your eye on, which is kind of interesting, is with the whole Louisville stuff going down and the whole payment of players, you just start keeping your eye on where the one and dones go. I'm not saying, anyone's paying anyone, but what I am saying is when the FBI spotlight is on the entire landscape of college basketball, just be interested where these one and done players who may be expecting some sort of financial compensation start going.
Yeah. And I think the whole FBI thing is no surprise to anyone because having worked in AAU and having covered recruiting as a reporter, I mean, you pretty well know what goes down and who's cheating. You may not know specifics about what they're getting or who's getting what, but you generally know which schools are clean and which schools are dirty, especially when you're covering a guy like Tom Crean who's so against breaking the rules that he'll learn every single rule in that NCAA play or rule book to make sure he doesn't break any of them. Whereas he's competing for recruits with guys that may offer something more than just a scholarship. And that's challenging to win. That was always my question before this FBI thing came up. Can schools that aren't willing to bend the rules a little bit win national titles anymore? Because it seems like the schools that are constantly up there are the schools that are usually tied to some sort of, whether it's academic misconduct or the payment of players or whatever it might be. Can the clean coaches who are competing for the same recruits on an uneven playing field, can they still win at that same level? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how this FBI thing is going to play out and how many programs are going to end up being affected. But I do think, like you said, Max, it's going to affect the recruiting game, because I think everybody's very weary right now, and those that may have been cheating before are probably backing off and putting on the brakes for a little while now.
And it's I don't want to play the woe is me victim card, but if you look at the teams that my team at Michigan and Indiana have lost to in the NCAA tournament, sophomore year it was the Final Four, national championship, Louisville. Now you hear, all these Louisville guys are coming out with the whole, escort scandals and the FBI's in it now. And it's like, should that count as a loss? Do we get a second place? Like, are we is there an asterisk next to the loss? Do we get rings? You know what I mean? And then junior year, we lose to Kentucky in the Elite Eight. And I'm not saying anything about Kentucky, but they just have a stigma. And then obviously North Carolina with Indiana, we lost to 2 years ago, which North Carolina has the whole, are they there for academics as well as athletics, or are they just, getting through school and it's a pathway to the NBA? I'm like, all the teams I've lost to, I'm not bitter, not too bitter, but, you gotta look at it with a little bit of a magnifying glass.
Yeah, I mean, it's fundamentally unfair, and I think there are programs and coaches that can win clean. You just have to – I mean, it's unfair at the highest level, but you just have to be better. I mean, that's all it comes down to. Like, Brad Stevens was able to have success at a mid-major school playing by the rules because he's just that good of a coach and he recruited to his style. I mean, Tony Bennett at Virginia, probably never going to win a title with that style, I don't think, but he's had a ton of success, and he hasn't ever really gotten that many five-star recruits. He recruits to a system, and so it can work. So just to wrap up this question, I don't think the one-and-done thing is something that hurts Indiana because they don't go after them or they don't get them. I mean, speaking of one-and-dones, I mean, Romeo Langford, who could well end up at Indiana, potential one and done. So it's not like Indiana is saying, no, we don't want to go after any one and done caliber players. They're recruiting who they think will fit the system best and will help them win. And if they end up being one and done in the end, then so be it. It's a different approach than maybe John Calipari takes at Kentucky, where he's seeking out guys and selling them on the fact he's going to make them a pro. But it doesn't mean that they're avoiding one and dones altogether. Now we move to our new segment, Quote to Note. Max, what quote are you thinking about this week?
I think, this whole segment, Quote to Note, is interesting. I don't want to get too philosophical, but sometimes you read something and you don't just read over it. You're like, oh, okay, think about it, whatever it pertains to you. Everyone has their own importance. But I think one that everyone can get something out of is one I read the other day. It was, judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. And that's Pierre-Marc Gaston, super French-sounding name, yada, yada. But I think that's interesting. Judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. Just people would think, listen to what they have to say and judge them from that. But, when somebody asks a question, you can really see what they value. And I think, people can always kind of tell you what you want to hear. But once they ask the correct things, then you're like, wait a second, I kind of get along with this person. And I even see that, I hope, my questions with Ed Schilling later in this podcast with the interview, I try to dive into, what makes a player great, what the competitive greatness of the Yogi Ferrells and the Gordon Haywards that he's worked with, what I want to go kind of behind the scenes and break down the talent pool of what makes the best athletes great. And so that's kind of the quote I've been pondering, and I think it does speak volumes.
Yeah, I like the idea for this segment, Max. And as a guy who loves storytelling and has a background in journalism and basically lives in the question and answer interview world, I think that's a really good quote. And I've personally just through 5 or 6 interactions and interviews that we've done together, seeing you grow as a questioneer, I guess, just in the way that you're able to interview. And I think you'll continue to get better at that. I think you may have a natural gift there that you're just developing even without, the formal education that I forget what I think you have a business degree, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. So you don't have the communications background per se, but kind of natural at it.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that, it's just kind of how my mind works. So I like breaking down, what makes things the way they are, the why of certain situations and people.
I also love quotes. I mean, it's something that we have a social intranet, so sort of like Facebook, but Department of Defense protected at the Navy base I work at. And so it's basically interaction between DoD employees across the country. And one thing I do on there is always put up a quote of the day, something that'll inspire people and kind of remind them what's important. So it was hard for me to choose just one for this first segment, but I'm going to go with a Plato quote as the first one.
Ooh,
we can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. And I think that really, there are other quotes similar to it. Our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. It is that we are powerful beyond measure. Very similar message to this quote from Plato. And I think it's true. It's like, oftentimes you'll see an adult and they know they want something or they know where they want to get, but fear holds them back or they don't think they have what it takes. And they're just like, yeah, I'd like to do that, but they don't actually make it happen. They're afraid to go into the light and to be exposed or to fail or anything like that. And that's kind of how that quote speaks to me. I don't know if that's one that you've heard before, Max, but if you have any reaction, I'd like to hear it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been reading, I don't know if you heard the book Sapiens. It's widely popular, but I just picked that up, and I think it's kind of funny. You're talking about how people get, they have that fear and that anxiety to do some things that maybe they shouldn't have that about. So many people struggle with that these days. I think Sapiens, the book, kind of it illuminated it well, where it talks about how, as a species, as human beings, we have this inherent anxiety just because the way we've developed as a species. Like, before we developed fire, you know what I mean? Like we were cavemen.
Right.
We would watch the lion go eat the giraffe, and then we wouldn't go get the remains yet because we have to wait for the hyenas to come in. We weren't at the top of the food chain like we are now. So, for thousands and thousands of years, we've had this almost anxiety and, always looking over our shoulder that's played in. And now we're finally at the top of the food chain. We keep lions in zoos. And I think it's funny, we still kind of struggle with the natural emotions that our ancestors did. I don't know. I really enjoyed this book. You guys should definitely go pick it up if you're listening to this. It's worthwhile read. It's a big book, only about quarter way through, but I think that it explains a lot about why we do and what makes us us.
Yeah, and I think to tie that to our previous conversation about social media, I think that's where a lot of the anxiety can come from. I think one of the biggest messages I would give here is, and something that I try to work on myself because it's an issue I think for everybody, is just to try and care less what other people think. And I think that's where people get in trouble with social media. They're checking to see how they're perceived or what people think of this photo or how many likes on that, like you were talking about before. But it's like, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It matters what you want to do. If you have a vision, a dream, a goal, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about it. If you believe you can do it, then just go get it done. And it's just about overcoming that natural inclination to have that anxiety and to care what other people think. Because yeah, sure, sometimes it matters, but you're much better off if you can teach yourself to tune other people out and just tune out the noise and the doubters and the non-believers and do what you set out to do. And like the Plato quote said, don't be afraid of the light.
Yeah, and I mean, what works for me is I like taking a step back and trying to put things in perspective. You know, if you think, you know, something's the biggest deal in the world and oh, you know, woe's me, and you know, realize there's 7.5 billion people in this world, you know, and the time frame we're living at is, you know, I think I was watching Cosmos with Neil deGrasse, and he was saying if we put the entire history of the world into a calendar year right now, you know, since, you know, the AD, if we talk about the AD dates, we're living in the last second of midnight of December 31st. Like, if you want to put things in perspective about the history, you know, you look back in hundreds and thousands of years of culture, and you look, you know, World War II, World War I, and Napoleon the Conqueror. Like, if Cindy called you ugly, I don't think you really need to get super upset about that. You know what I mean? Like, it put things in perspective. Like, that's why, you know, talking about the trolls, you know, I kind of laugh, like, when someone, you know, they're so consumed about, you know, me being a slow white guy. You know what I mean? It's like, all right, you know what I mean? Like, it's me doing my best, and you know, we're winning games, so, you know, screw you.
Right. Be who you are and not who others want you to be or perceive you to be. I think that's kind of the overall point here. The overall theme of this entire episode has been, you know, think for yourself. And I think that's one of the things that scares me most. And I think we discussed this before, Max, was just the conformity of our generation, the generation after us, and just this era in general. The fact that there aren't as many independent thinkers as there were in decades past. And there's a lot more conformity because people fear being politically incorrect or being called out or being labeled as something. And when you look at innovation and how we grow as a people and as a society, it's the people who think independently and differently and who are told their ideas are stupid that really drive the culture forward. So I think that's kind of the overwhelming theme, and we've hit on it in a variety of different ways, but just think for yourself and actually take time and sit and consider what you think about it. Because there's oftentimes you'll find there's ideas already, preconceived notions in your head put there by what you read on Twitter or what the commentator said on TV, but actually sit there and think for yourself what you think about what you just saw or what you just heard or whatever it might be. And I think you'll be surprised by what you find.
And yeah, you know, while we're staying on the quote to note part, you know, something that pops in my brain is a quote by Mark Twain that says, you know, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And I think that's interesting just because, you know, people tend to be followers and overall when you're not leading and you're not doing something unique, no one's really finding much value in you. You know what I mean? If you tend to do something unique like that, those are the ones that get remembered. And I think it's people enjoy living their lives when they're not constantly following what they should be doing.
Those are the ones that get remembered, and those are the ones that end up successful because, I mean, if anybody watches Shark Tank, what's the first question almost always that the investors have for the person coming in? What's unique about what you do? What can you do that nobody else can do? And that ultimately, whether it's business or whatever it might be, is what's important. What separates you from the rest of the pack? Because otherwise, you're just a face in the crowd. And I mean, if you're happy with that, then that's perfectly okay. But standing out is all right as well.
Well, I think we're going to get to our interview now with Ed Schilling. It was really, really actually informative, and we learned a lot about Indiana basketball as well as, you know, how he values players as a coach, how he got to Indiana. Just some really good stuff. He's a really great interview. I think you guys will enjoy it.
Yeah, so here's the assistant Indiana men's basketball coach now, our featured interview on this episode, Ed Schilling.
So, Ed, before we get into IU or anything, obviously you and I share some common ground. You know, you coached and I played with him and against him, Yogi Ferrell. He's a very unique competitor. I'm sure you know. You saw him in high school.
Yeah.
Did he always have that ambition, or what things really led up to it?
Well, he always has had that like super laser focus. I think in coaching him in high school for 3 years and then having him in camps and things like that before then, when he was younger, I don't think his eyes ever left my eyes during a timeout or when I called him over. I mean, he just had that burning desire to do what you tell him and to go out and compete. You know, probably the biggest thing you could do with him is give him some sort of challenge, and that just took him to another level.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so like just playing with him, you know, he's definitely one of a kind there. I think, you know, when you're looking at his product, which is his competitive greatness, I think he's, you know, one of the best competitors I've ever played with. And, just finding out the day-to-day things that kind of went into that recipe of his greatness was like, I mean, it was really one of a kind. I mean, I think it was undervalued how much it inspired the entire team to basically follow him.
Absolutely. You know, I think a couple of things stand out when in coaching him. One, we would go through a whole shooting system every single day of practice when I coached at Park Tudor High School, and I was coaching there and running my academy. Is we would go through this half-hour shooting thing where we'd record every shot, and he took every one for 3 years as if it were the game winner. I mean, he just to win the state championship or win the NCAA championship. I mean, he had that type of focus on every shot. And when your best player has that type of attention to detail and that type of focus, it makes it pretty easy to coach because the rest of the team's going to fall in line.
Exactly.
And, one of the other things that I remember is we were playing in the regional in Connorsville, and we're playing, and it was the morning game, and you play 2 games in a day. And I remember he came down and he took a couple really deep jump shots, like 25 feet or something. So I called timeout and I brought him over and I just kind of ripped him. I said, "You mean to tell me this team is so good that they make you shoot 25 footers? You mean that guy right over there is so good?" And anyway, there was a quick timeout. He went back out and I think he shot about the next 8 shots were layups. He just blew by guys. But that's how he was, though. I mean, he would take he could take critique. He would take what you told him and he would apply it. Where a lot of guys may listen, they may not listen. This kid listened and he applied it, and then he tried to take it to another level.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's just wired differently, and it was a pleasure to play with. I mean, I tell you what, it was a hassle to play against when I was at Michigan, and it was just so. You could just tell who the head of the snake was, and he was so tough. Yeah. Speaking with the players you've worked with, obviously you worked with like the Gordon Haywards and Greg Odens, Mike Connolly, Cody Zeller, and all the UCLA talent that's been there the past couple of years. So you've seen talent. You understand like how guys are wired at the elite level. So I have a question. So who is one guy you wish you could have coached?
That I haven't had a chance to coach, huh?
Yeah, just you've seen a lot of guys with their winning attitudes and what it takes to be great. From what you've heard or seen, is there maybe one guy in the NBA or anything that you're like, man, like I love his work ethic. I love what he stands for, the things that go into his competitive greatness. I would have liked to coach him.
Well, one of the guys, and it's kind of an interesting story. When I was assistant with the New Jersey Nets, back when I was in New Jersey, I'm showing my age, we worked out a little high school kid that was trying to go right from high school to college. And, I remember working this kid out, and he, for the pre-draft thing. And I remember, man, he was just terrific. And after the workout was over, he grabbed me and he said, the workouts are really hard. And usually these guys are ready to get out of there. And the 2 of us stayed in the gym in New Jersey, and we worked for about another 45 minutes, which was just unheard of to like even do an extra shot after how hard we put those guys through. Well, we ended up not getting the kid in the draft, but he ended up being good, and I sure wish we could have coached him. I think it would have made our careers a lot better. His name's Kobe Bryant.
And, there we go.
So
I was wondering.
I would have liked to. Yeah, I would have liked to have coached him. Let's put it that way. But there was a lot of extenuating circumstances. We ended up getting Kerry Kittles, who was a nice player and had a very good career. Now he's a college coach actually in the Ivy League. But I think Kobe Bryant would have been a lot of fun to coach.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard those Kobe stories. Again, talking about guys just wired differently, and appreciate competition and just love the work ethic. Just lives and dies by putting in that extra 40 minutes an hour or so. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, he was young at that point too. You said he was in high school, right?
Yeah, he was coming right out of high school. Now, I was also coming right out of high school because I had gone from Logansport High School to UMass, where I was with John Calipari, but also Bruiser Flint, as we know, been reunited here at Indiana. And then I was right to the NBA, and so I was really only about 300 and some days removed from being a high school teacher and coach. So Kobe and I, we had dinner that night when he got into New Jersey. I picked him up at the airport and then had dinner with him. So he was just like one of my students that I was working with at Logansport. Granted, a little bit better talent than I had with the Berries, but nonetheless, I mean, we had just a whole lot. It was real easy for the two of us to hang out.
Gotcha. I mean, so you understand the high school side. When you're coaching college kids, what's the biggest thing? So something that John Beeline, when I played for him, he had a quote that he always said. Freshmen, they just want to play. Sophomores, they want to start. Juniors, they want to score. And seniors, I tell you what, they just want to win. What's something that a freshman thinks he knows, but doesn't really realize he didn't know until he was a senior?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just how hard it is to win. A lot of times in high school, you can just have more talent than the other guy, and you win the game, and it's not a big deal. I think young players don't understand how hard you have to work mentally and physically, but then how difficult it is to win a Division I game. I think that's the biggest thing. And for players to understand all that goes into winning one basketball game or winning a game for, as you would say, in the Big Ten or the Pac-12 or whatever, to win one of those games, they don't understand how difficult that is. And I think, especially freshmen coming in, they just don't get how hard you have to compete on a daily basis to be able to win at this level.
Yeah, I mean, it's they're almost talent spoiled for so many years of their life. Everyone playing, especially at the Big Ten level, they're all the best kid on their high school team, and they all had that ability to just take over a game. It's almost like evening the playing field and letting them be a regular person. And actually have to understand what it takes, behind the scenes, with your work ethic and mentality.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's completely different. I know what you mean. I had back when I was in high school and I was playing, I could just go to the block and post up, do my drop step, and drop about 30 points. And then I go and I'm playing against the AJ Hammonds and the Adrian Paynes. It's like, this is not the same level. I got to expand my game. That's where I really developed my 3-point shot. So it's I think it grows you. I mean, it just kind of shows how different challenges can really grow you.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of life skills associated with that, whether regardless of what they're going to do after the air finally comes out of the basketball, but you realize just you can work so much harder than you really thought you could. And what the normal person realizes, you get a whole new appreciation for work ethic when you play Division I basketball.
Yeah. I got one more question about just, being
Sure.
Recruiting. And so I remember when I was at AAU and, you look over and you see the rainbow of coaches all sporting their college shirt, and someone has a crazy dunk that some of those AAU kids, I tell you what, they are stupid athletic. And, I'd be like, right. I'd be so impressed. My jaw would drop. And I look over to the stands and every coach, no matter what school they're with, kept this poker face. And, I'm like, man, that didn't impress me. It kind of surprised me at first, but I get it. It's part of the job. So what what really impressed you watching a kid play AAU? I know like there's some people say they look for a kid doing something different, whether it's talking on defense or taking charges, because it's not natural. You know, everyone thinks they have to go out there and, you know, shoot and score, and that's how they're going to get to the best school in the entire, you know, nation. So what's something you really look for in AAU watching a kid play?
Well, obviously they have to have a certain talent level. If they don't have a certain talent level, then obviously you're not probably watching them to begin with. But, you know, I think one of the things that I like to see is a kid that really cares about winning. In the summers, you know, a lot of times, you know how it is. You're playing so many games in so many cities during the course of the summer, and you know whether you win or not, you're in the Platinum Division. So, you know, they're playing the next game. They're in the pool. They go from pool play to bracket play, regardless of what their record was. So, seeing a kid that really values winning is something that kind of always catches my attention. A lot more than a windmill dunk or something like that when nobody's running back on defense. You know, a kid that really values winning when the game doesn't necessarily impact, you know, what they're going to do the next day or the next couple of days. That's something that catches my attention.
Yeah, I guess that shows that you were probably a little bit more mature watching these kids than I was when I was in high school. I was the starry-eyed, like, oh my God, did you just do that? That's definitely interesting.
But that's the thing that matters in the end, right, Max? I mean, you see a guy and he can put up all the highlights and the numbers he wants in AAU, but when it really comes down to it at the next level and even at the NBA level, how badly do you want to win? Do you have that Russell Westbrook, I'm going to chase down every offensive rebound and give us 9 shots to try and tie this game up at the end? Or is it just not all that important to you? I think that's what really separates the greats from the talented guys that end up being very good. Would you guys agree with that?
I really do, and I think that's one of the things that Coach Miller is passionate about here is I'm trying to teach and to show these guys, and a lot of these guys weren't you know, the high end players last year. You know, they weren't the go-to guys where the winning and losing was on their shoulders. You know, for the bulk of this team, and really trying to teach them what it takes to win and how hard you have to play, and you know how important the details are. And you know that's probably been the biggest challenge so far, and we believe they're going to get there. But it's a challenge nonetheless.
Along those same lines, I mean, how can you kind of speak to how difficult it is to implement a brand new system that's quite a bit different from the system these guys had been running? And do you think it's almost maybe easier for the guys coming in fresh than the guys like Robert Johnson and Josh Newkirk that have been playing in a different system for a number of years and are trying to shift here at the end of their career?
That's a great question. I think it is quite a challenge because my high school coach, Jim Rosensteel, who won over 500 games, and you know he used to say habits, good or bad, are hard to break. And you know, if you've got a habit of getting out and denying you know, passing lanes, and you're out there versus pack line, that's a hard change. And a lot of times when fatigue sets in, you go back to wherever your habits are. And so trying to break some habits, and not that one system's necessarily better than another. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to win a basketball game, but when you've got to have everybody on the same page in order to win, you know, especially if you don't have, you know, you don't have 3 or 4 lottery picks in your lineup. So you've got to all be on the same page. And all it takes, as you know, is 1 or 2 guys to revert back to an old habit. And boom, you're getting scored on, or you're turning the ball over, or something like that. So I do think it's maybe in some regards harder for a veteran guy, a guy that's played under a different system. And again, not to be critical of any system because they all can win. But yeah, making that change and to get everybody on the same page is definitely a challenge.
When I had you on the podcast when you first took the job over the summer, you spoke about how much you respected Archie from afar and what you knew of him and how that job kind of came to be. Now that you're up close working with him every day, you're around him, working next to him, is there anything that surprised you about him that you didn't expect, or anything different than what you initially thought when you took the job in the off season?
Well, I just, my admiration has continued to grow. I just think he has an incredible vision and passion for how he wants the game played, and he is unrelenting in getting this accomplished. And it's consistent. He's not different one day than he is from the next. It is absolute. You know what to expect, and he's bringing it every single day. There's no wonder what coach is going to be like today. No, he's the same every day, and he brings the passion, he brings the focus, the attention to detail is there every day, and he sets the standard. He doesn't have to tell anybody that he's in charge or whatever. No, it's obvious that he's bringing it every single day, and that's something that I've really respected. Is obviously he has his understanding of the game, his drills, how everything is leading and streamlined towards exactly what we're trying to do offensively and defensively. There's no wasted time. There's no wasted drill. Everything is streamlined towards what we're trying to do. But his consistency and his passion and attention to detail is what I've really come to admire.
Along those lines, I mean, I think one of the things that's been most impressive about him so far to Indiana fans and to me is his ability to recruit and the way he's gone about it, just his dedication to the kids and his no-nonsense, business-like, straightforward approach to it, which I wonder from your perspective, being around a lot of different coaches and a lot of different programs and seeing how the recruiting process goes, how unique do you think it is, his style? It almost reminds me of Brad Stevens' recruiting style with Boston. He's not just going to try and sell you on the history of the program or the organization. He's going to tell you specifically how he plans to use you, and he's not going to make any promises he can't hold. How unique do you think that is, and do you think that's a big reason why he's had success in getting kids like Robert Fennessy to commit without even taking an official visit anywhere?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just how honest he is. And a great analogy with Brad Stevens, because he recruited quite a few of my players at, a couple of my guys at Park Tudor. And then I also coached against him and had a chance to speak to his staff. He had me in a couple of times when I was doing the academy type thing. But, Arch is very much like that. I mean, what you see is what you get. There's not he's not going to be any different in front of a recruit than he is sitting in the office or sitting in his house, he's not putting on there's no fakeness to him. And I think recruits really like that. I mean, I think a lot of times they see all these coaches, the parade of coaches come through. And the one thing they see about Arch is, this guy is authentic. He's not sitting up there telling jokes and, that's not him. He is who he is. And he's like that all the time. And I think players have a sense of comfort with that they kind of like, okay, I know what to expect here. This isn't some sales job.
Yeah, and just that authenticity. Just the landscape of all of college basketball. That recruiting style. From my personal experience, getting recruited and hearing stories from old teammates. The honesty in recruiting. It's how important is that? Just because so many kids are like. They get told, you're going to start here, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And it almost builds onto their ego of high school. I can, you know what I mean? Like they have this ego in high school. I can change the game. I don't have to, it's winning isn't, you know what I mean? Winning is easy. It's I'm this good. And it builds up to their ego, having that different pitch, how important is that long-term for, a kid to understand, hey, just, the honesty is what's important. Because at 18 years old, I tell you what, I would rather hear, Max, you're going to start, we're going to go to the Final Four, than I would rather hear, Max, like you might not play till your sophomore year, but it's just the truth. But, long term, I would value that second one so much more.
Well, yeah. And he's not saying, hey, you're not going to start. He's going to say, here's how we play. Here's who we have in the program. We think you could be a great player here at Indiana. Here's why. Here's how we play. And he'll show them, hey, here's what we're looking to do on misses. Here's what we're looking to do on defensively. Here's how we're going to play. Can you see yourself in this system? And, and some guys are yes and others are no. But I mean, the one thing we're going to be is we're going to come after it, but we're going to do it in a way that, again, is authentic. It's not, we're not building these guys up that, you're the next Michael Jordan here. But at the same time, you know what? We have a unique style of play. We have an incredible tradition. We have a lot of things to offer. Is this a good fit for you? We think it is, or we wouldn't be here. That's kind of, he's going to be real honest like that. It's not promising in the world, but we are promising a great opportunity.
And do you think that works better? I was watching one of your interviews talking about recruiting, but differences between LA and Indiana. Obviously, here it tends to be stereotypically, it's more of the homegrown blue collar. You're saying that coaches kind of have more say. There's not as many third parties playing the strings and doing that. How much does the Indiana basketball culture and recruits especially, do you see them just from a stereotype of where they're from, value that honesty?
Well, I think more so. I mean, a lot of times when you get to, the more people that are involved in the process, the more there's people gassing these guys up to the point that it's truly unrealistic. And, they think they're one and done and all that. Well, shoot, a lot of times that's not going to be the case. It's, whether a McDonald's All-American or not. And so I think one thing that I've found, at least with Midwest kids in general, is there are less people involved in the recruiting process. And that allows you to really get to know the main people better, as opposed to LA, for example, or some of those LA type kids. There's so many people involved, and you never know who's the one that has the kid's ear and blah, blah, blah. Where here, it's kind of, a lot of times it's the parents, it's the high school coach. And, that's makes it a lot easier, at least easier for them to know what you're about. Doesn't necessarily make it easier to get the young man, but at least it's easier for you to say, hey, here's who we are. Is this what, as opposed to all the smoke and mirrors, do we get into the right guy? And this guy's pushing one agenda because he has something involved. Less of that here. And so for that reason, I think I'm a lot better suited for it anyway.
A little more natural, the parent-child relationship.
Yes.
Coach, I know you got to get off to practice, but wanted to ask you one more question, kind of wrap this back around to where we started with Max asking you about Yogi. And I may be completely off here, but when I watch Devontae Green play, especially in that Seton Hall game, I saw small little flashes of Yogi in him, in the sense that a guy that could maybe grow into a leader, a point guard, and an elite player in the Big Ten eventually. Do you see anything in Devontae Green? You've been around a lot of great point guards, and I know that he's not your traditional point guard, but I kind of feel like he has the vision and the skill set necessary to become one if need be. Do you see that in him? And would you agree that there's some flashes there of a guy that could grow into a leader and a star in the college game?
Well, I certainly think he has the athleticism. He has that burst, that athletic burst of speed like a Yogi would have, where he could just blow by guys. And I think he's the one guy on our team that really has that type of physical talent to be able to become a great on-ball defender and to be able to impact the game at both ends, in the fact that he can guard a quick guard, he has strength, and he also has ball skills and speed and can make shots. So I think there's a lot of the talent level is there. I think he's got to continue to grow in his consistency in terms of practice and games and that type stuff. And then also the one thing that I think Max alluded to was just Yogi's the mental toughness and the mental consistency, that every single day you knew what you were getting. And I think that's the unique trait, that if a guy like Devontae could get that and grow into that, certainly the sky's the limit for him.
All right, Coach. Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know you got a busy schedule, and the season is in full swing now, but we really enjoyed having you. Thanks for doing it.
My pleasure. Look forward to seeing you guys. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, Coach. That's all for today's episode of Earn Your Stripes. Special thanks again to Ed Schilling, the assistant men's basketball coach at Indiana University, formerly at UCLA, and Park Tutor, where he coached Yogi Ferrell. Really appreciate him taking so much time. I thought that was an interesting, in-depth conversation. Hopefully you'll find it to be as well. Once again, thank you to Cardinal Spirits for sponsoring this podcast. Make sure you visit them in Bloomington next time you get the chance. We'll have episodes soon coming up with former Indiana sharpshooter Matt Roth, as well as former Indiana basketball coach Tom Crean, among others. So you want to make sure you hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss any of our episodes. And if you enjoyed this show, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. And leave us a 5-star review if you would. It would really help out, and share it with your friends. Do whatever you can to help us spread. We really appreciate you guys for listening, and it would mean a lot to us if you would subscribe and leave a 5-star review. For Max Bielfeldt, I'm Justin Albers. This has been the first episode of Earn Your Stripes. We'll see you next time.